census that was taken, we know that there's 2 records of that. Well, it's actually mentioned in a number of places. But the main areas, the 2 kind of starting points are obviously 1 Chronicles chapter 21 and also the record in Samuel as well, so 2 Samuel. So we want to kind of work out, was this actually really a major sin or something that David did wrong? Or is it actually part of a bigger picture, a bigger story that's being told during this record? So let's just have a quick look at Chronicles chapter 21, half and half. So in Chronicles chapter 21, it starts and it says, "And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel." Okay, and so we use this, don't we, all the time to demonstrate what Satan really is. And in this case, it's describing an adversary. And the adversary is actually somebody who's coming up against Israel in this case. And it's obviously God moving David to number the people, as it says in 2 Samuel chapter 24 at the beginning. "And again the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel for some reason, and he moved David against them, and them to say, 'Go number Israel and Judah.'" So then he goes on to do that, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. But was the very fact that he did that a sin? Now consider 1 Kings chapter 15, where we've got a summary of David, and you don't need to turn this up. You've got a summary of David's life. What does it say? That he was a righteous man, wasn't he? And he says he sinned only in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. It doesn't actually mention this incident in that. But then it also doesn't mention a lot of other incidents that he would have, done in his life. There would have been lots of things that he did wrong in his life. But it mentions explicitly, doesn't it, the matter of Uriah the Hittite. And it doesn't mention what you'd think was a major, major sin, which is actually numbering Israel. And actually, God was angry with Israel. That's what was happening here. And it was God that moved David against them. So it was God who was taking this action in order to do something against Israel. And the thing that happened to Israel, there was the pestilence that was chosen by David. Actually, there's a number of things that could have happened, but the pestilence was chosen because he wanted it to come from God. And then obviously that was experienced by Israel, a massive problem experienced by a lot of people as a result of the thing that David did. So let's have a look then at the evidence that it was something wrong that he did. Okay, so we've kind of set it up to say God was using this circumstance in order to do something to Israel, and that it wasn't mentioned against him in that summary. But also there's evidence that it was something that he did that was wrong. And the pieces of evidence for that are, first of all, in that chapter, 2 Samuel chapter 24, when you read on, get to verse 3, Joab is the captain of the host at the time, and he's the person who's being asked to go out and do this numbering. And Joab said to the king, "Now the Lord thy God add unto thy people," verse 2 actually, "So Joab the captain of the host which was with him, go now through the tribes of Israel, through Dan, Beersheba, number the people." And then he responds to that and says, "Now Joab said unto the king, Now the Lord thy God add unto the people how many soever they be, 100-fold, and that the eyes of my lord the king may see it. But why doth my lord the king delight in this thing?" Now what he's essentially saying there is, you'll get from God the number of people you need. However large the people are, is however large the people are. Why does it delight you to know this thing? Why is it that you need to understand this thing? So maybe the track that's being led here by the things that Joab are saying is more aligned to not trusting in in man, not trusting in the number of people in the army. Now Joab was the captain of the host, and he was the person who was being asked to go and number the people. There's evidence in 1 Corinthians 21 that those that were under 20 years old were not counted, and David says why, and that's because God will create a large number, a great multitude. So David was mindful of those things, obviously during the instruction, but Joab saw it as being going and counting lots of people to know how big the army was. That's how Joab saw the process that was being pursued here. And in 2 Kings 6, we see how this is not necessarily a good thing to do, trusting in the number of people that are in your army. So in 2 Kings chapter 6, we have the incident with Elisha, when the Syrians are struck blind, aren't they, as a miracle, and so defeated. But the servant is absolutely terrified. And why is he terrified? Because the city's compassed with horses and chariots, verse 15. This is 2 Kings 6, verse 15. There's chariots and there's horses. And the servant said, "Alas, my master, how shall we do?" And he said, "Fear not, for they that be with us are more than them that be with them." And Elisha prayed and said, "Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see." And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses, chariots of fire round about Elisha. There's also a psalm as well. I won't go into this, but if you want to note this down, Psalm 20, the whole of Psalm 20 seems to indicate David learning a lesson about not trusting in horses and chariots, etc. So that's how I read it as well. So again, open for discussion about this. But it seems that psalm may relate to this incident, if that is really what's happening within 2 Samuel chapter 24. So there seems to be some evidence that this thing wasn't counted to him. There was some evidence that it might be that there is some backing for it being a problem, being a sin. The second part of evidence for that is that David's heart smote him. Okay, verse 10, David's heart smote, this is back in 2 Samuel 24, David's heart smote him, and he said that he had numbered the people, and said unto the Lord, I have sinned greatly in that I have done, and now I beseech thee, O Lord, take away the iniquity of my servant, for I have done very foolishly. So that's the terminology he uses. He recognises his son, and his heart smites him as a result of that. Similar phraseology is used in 1 Chronicles 21, if you've got your finger there as well. If you look there, it says, And David said unto the Lord, Is it not I that commanded the people to be numbered? Even I it is that have sinned and done evil indeed. But as for these sheep, what have they done? Let thine hand, I pray thee, O Lord my God, be upon me and on my father's house, and not this people to be plagued. There's a link back to the plague and numbering back in Exodus as well, and we'll have a look at that briefly in a second. But maybe there's another way of looking at this. Now, what was happening at the time? The preparation for building of the house. David wasn't allowed to do it, but he was preparing things for his son to be able to do it. Now, was David trying to do something similar to Exodus chapter 30 in this passage, and gather monies and stuff from the people in order to build the house, or get things ready for the house? Very similar to Exodus chapter 30. So let's just go back to Exodus chapter 30, because in there we see God giving a commandment to take a census of the people. And you might think, well, how is it that Moses is allowed to do it, but David isn't allowed to do it for the house? But here it is allowed. So Exodus chapter 30, there's a section, verses 11 down to 17, where it talks about, the Lord said, when thou takest the sum of the children of Israel, he's counting the children of Israel, after their number, then shall they give every man a ransom for his soul for the Lord. And the whole point was, for it to be an atonement, for it to be an offering, a service, as we look later on down, verse 16, and thou shalt take the atonement money of the people of Israel, and thou shalt appoint it for the service, the tabernacle of the congregation. So this is something that's happening for the tabernacle of the congregation, but who is it that is saying, go and do this and take this service money? Go and take this money, because it's going to be a service, it's going to be an atonement. The person who commands it is, it's God, isn't it? God is giving this commandment. And that becomes absolutely clear in Numbers chapter 19, verse 1. You don't need to turn to it because it's a very short passage. And it says, it's not verse 1, it's Numbers 1, verse 19. I always make that mistake. So Numbers 1, verse 19. Lots of passages here. I hope you're making lots of notes. Verse 19. As the Lord commanded Moses, so he numbered them in the wilderness in Sinai. Who was it that commanded to number the people in the day of David? It was David, and it explicitly says that twice, doesn't it, in those passages, that David commanded. So maybe that then was the sin. And maybe the motivation of the sin wasn't necessarily to do something incorrect, like know how many people are in his army, but actually a positive thing to try and get things together for the house. The problem was a process problem, potentially. A bit like when he brought the ark into Jerusalem. He used the wrong process, and somebody died as a result of him commanding the wrong process to be followed. Like Uzzah, didn't he? And there's Perez Uzzah was named after him, a breach upon Uzzah. So maybe similarly, David had good motivations here for bringing in money in order to use it for building the temple, but actually the process was incorrect. It was him who commanded while they were waiting for God to command. Now the other aspect of this is that this whole incident is a massive type of Christ, being counted with the sinners, and sacrificing in the same location that that's used for many things for the temple, etc. And so there's a massive significance in this beyond just this incident. The fact that there's a plague upon Israel that then he takes upon himself this sin, and then he then asks and puts that on and sacrifices, doesn't he? There was something that was done incorrectly, I think, and it's what the motivation for that was. Was it to know how big his army was, or was it following the incorrect process for building the temple?